But let's move on to our next storyteller. He is a Spanish teacher at Richmond High School who most recently was on the stage in Mamma Mia. Please welcome Bill Langley.
Good evening. Thank you, Stanley. So, I'm going to tell you about the moment that my creativity died and how it came back to me. When I was in high school, I was probably the biggest nerd I knew. Anyone else? A few of you. Everyone else was the ones who made fun of me. Oh, okay. That was... So, I did a lot of reading in high school, a lot of fantasy novels like Harry Potter. Yeah, and yay, reading. And most influential to me, the inheritance cycle. Aragon, you know, the dragon rider. Yeah. So, it was so influential to me. I read everything I could get my hands on. I read the canon. I read any kind of encyclopedia that the author put out. I read fan fiction. I read fan fiction of the fan fiction. Just anything I could get my hands on. All of this gave me a lot of input into what was going to become one of the most creative moments that I had as a person. When I was in high school, I also dabbled around in the internet. And one of the things that I did on the internet was create role-playing forums. Because we didn't have LARPing yet. So I started creating this world within a world of dragon riders and dwarves and elves and werecats. Not unlike werewolves. And trying to have the time of my life by telling these stories through the internet, coming up with stories simultaneously as someone else, trying to make sure that the story that I had in mind and the story that they had in mind, that mine would come out on top. I'm still not certain to this day whether or not some of the stories that we came up with became canon because they showed up in the book, or if it was just parallel thought and the overeagerness of a 14-year-old to have recognition in the world. But then, as high school went on, and I slowly backed away from this online fantasy world and went off to college, I had so little time to read all those fantasy things that I had loved before. Instead of reading Aragon or Harry Potter, I now was reading the morphosyntactic and sociolinguistic form of the Mesoamerican variation of Castilian. Which, as much of a nerd as I was for Aragon and Harry Potter, I was just as much of a nerd for language acquisition and language learning. But the problem of not having any time to do fictional pleasure reading is the only thing that you're given out is, I mean, to me, interesting. To all of you, probably really boring. So I never had a chance during my college years to explore that creative side of me. So for 7.5 years, the creativity that I had once harbored was just no more. I didn't get to write about dragons and elves. I had to write about what it takes to learn a language. Once again, perfectly fine by me. It's the most interesting thing in the world. And then I graduated college and had to find something to do with my time. Now I had evenings and weekends free to read what I wanted to read and write what I wanted to write. So, of course, I read about language acquisition and language teaching. Until I took to Netflix. And on Netflix, I started watching all of these stand-up specials, all of these sketch comedy shows, and then I decided, you know what? I can do that. So I'm not reading much of any fantasy novels right now, but I'm watching a lot of creativity of others and how they're expressing it. And I had known for a while that I wanted to do stand-up comedy. And it wasn't until my friend Casey Polans had decided, hey, let's go do this. Well, we never got the chance. He passed away. And 6 months later, there was an opportunity to do some stand-up comedy. So I went back and started watching all of these shows, all these stand-up specials, listening to all these podcasts on how people are creating their jokes. And as much of a nerd as I was about Harry Potter and Aragon and language acquisition and language learning, I have become such a nerd about stand-up comedy. I am still waiting on my Netflix special. And I'm sure that with more time and getting more of that exposure to comedians and sketch comedy, that one day it's going to happen. So look out for that. Thank you. I'm Bill Langley.